Ideas have always been my superpower. When I've needed to make a move, to reinvent, resolve a problem, recharge a client relationship, or turn failure into an opportunity. Ideas are what allows me to help a friend in need or offer advice to a business owner. And even within family time, ideas can turn a few hours of downtime into an adventure. I remember when my daughter was young, probably no more than 3, an early Saturday morning, set up a toy store or bookstore in the den versus watching cartoons. We'd make signs and figure out the best place to merchandise the best sellers and to move the impulse items. Ideas are the currency of life, and whether big or small, baked in absurdity or reality, they're the stimulus for collaboration, amplification, and conversation. Over time, the ideas I've learned to cherish are the ones steeped in positivity and possibility, and driven by people with resourcefulness, resolve, and imagination. People who can walk the high wire between dreaming and doing and desirability and feasibility. I guess that's why I love entrepreneurs so much. Now, I'm often approached by people who want to share their ideas with me. I guess that honor comes with my age, my former profession, and possibly my reputation. And each time I'm asked, I'm always flattered. And whenever I can make the time to listen generously, I do. I know that some really are just looking for validation, and that's okay. And there's others that want to really dive into their idea. Is it worthy? Is it sound? Can it be improved? Can I even offer help or get involved? And that's where this show came about. Michelle Smythe, who worked with me for years, asked me if I would spend time with 2 individuals to learn about their business. Now, as you listen to their story, I want you to ask yourself, is their idea one whose time is due, and do these 2 entrepreneurs deserve your due? And there's a twist. These 2 individuals are not only business partners, but life partners. And does their backstory include lessons in life that will help them? You will soon learn that they're both immigrants from a home country in Ireland. They come from different backgrounds, but they have a common soul. Both are protectors and defenders of people. And as their story unfolds, ask yourself the same questions I ask when evaluating the merits of an idea. Or picture yourself in one of those chairs featured on a television show like Dragon's Den or Shark Tank. Ask yourself, how committed are they to their idea? Is this commitment their binding superpower for overcoming any circumstances? Or is it their blinding weakness as they refuse to see or acknowledge anything else but their own vision? Is their idea based on an unmet need? Or is this ground that's already well covered in our economy? Do they as individuals have what it takes to nurture their idea and grow it into a business? And in this partnership, who has influence and who has authority? And is this across the board? Or do their respective strengths match up to different parts of the organization? And can they convince all who matters, customers, employees, investors, influence, and suppliers, that they have a better mousetrap?
This is Chatter That Matters with Tony Chapman, presented by RBC.
My guests today are Grace Tallon and Joe O'Connor. They've co-founded Work Time Reduction. As they share our idea, I'd have to say it's been around since the beginning of time, but more often than not, a fantasy. That is for a shorter work week, or in some cases, the same amount of hours, but reframed as the 4-day work week.
Everyone seems to be talking about the 4-day work week, especially since the pandemic.
Does that tell you that what we've been doing in sort of office culture for decades is wrong? You don't need to work that many days. You can get the same amount of output out of people in 4 days as you could in 5.
We also know that in most office-based professions, we are currently wasting between 2 to 3 hours a day on overlong and unnecessary meetings, distractions and interruptions in the workday, and poor use of technology.
Grace and Joe, welcome to Chatter That Matters.
Thanks for having us.
Good to join you.
So in my opening, I talked about my love for ideas, and so share the concept behind work time reduction and why you feel your premise is something you can build a business on.
The concept is very much driven around the idea that there is not a direct correlation between hours worked and productive output. If you look internationally, some of the most productive, most competitive countries in the world, from the Netherlands to Denmark, work some of the fewest hours. And I was initially inspired by this idea when doing some work in Ireland, looking at working parents within the public service who are already working reduced hour work weeks for a reduction in salary, but often were producing as much, if not more, than when they were working 5-day weeks. So I think that raises the question that I would encourage every CEO to ask themselves, how much of my employee's work week is currently focused productive activity? And is there an opportunity to incentivize change and to actually improve our productivity by offering something as transformative and ambitious as a shorter work week?
And I'm going to push back at you throughout this because I want you to defend your idea. The whole premise of the show is how entrepreneurs, when they really believe in something and go after something, that means they have to overcome obstacles. So I'm going to play devil's advocate. So in COVID, everybody was forced to work from home. And in the beginning, all we talked about was this incredible productivity gain and how people were like, just because they didn't have to deal with all the inconvenience of commuting, because were given freedom. But over time, as COVID opened up opportunities to spend my day doing other things, I'm not sure that productivity continued. And so I guess my question to you is an isolated study where you say, listen, we can get those kind of productivity gains, but over time, when people start getting accustomed, for example, to a 4-day work week, isn't it possible that the same way they might have squandered time during the 5-day week, they're going to start bringing it into the 4-day week?
It's possible. And I think you're asking the right question. If you look at the transition to remote, that was done in a very unstructured, unplanned way for many organizations. And you saw this initial individual level productivity gain as people weren't commuting, as people were kind of doing much more heads down focused work. But over time, many organizations were unable to retain the productivity boost from collaborative innovation, from creativity. So when we talk about the shorter work week, nobody that I know of is arguing that if you reduce your employees' hours, you get this automatic productivity boost. This needs to be very clearly defined as, this is not a perk. This is not a giveaway. This is an incentive, which is very clearly linked to collective performance accountability, efficiency, and continuous improvement. And if you structure it in that way and on those terms, then what we've seen throughout the trials, which have been studied, not just within the initial 6-month period, but a year down the road, these organizations have been able to sustain these gains. But I would agree with you. It's not automatic and it needs to be focused on productivity.
So for the listeners, you're going to see why you're going to enjoy this show, because Joe is without question one of the thought leaders in this space globally. He's been cited in major magazines. So I'm looking forward to continue to dive deeper into this business. But Grace, I got to ask you a question. And that is, almost since when I started reading science fiction, and they use dates then, this century, it seems so far away back then, but, they talked about things like flying cars and longevity, but the other one was always this shorter work week. And given that was baked in our realm of fantasy for so long, do you find it's difficult to bring this to the marketplace as something new and worth considering versus something I've been hearing about forever but never seemed to take hold? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I'm still waiting for the hoverboard from Back to the Future, which I still haven't got. But yeah, absolutely. But it's within our grasp and our control to make this happen as a society. We have the tools and technology to work shorter work weeks, but we don't seem to have done that yet. So the more people who are doing it, the more people who are trying it, this can happen. And we've seen how transformative it is for employers and employees. So this isn't just an incentive that, you're giving back to your employees. Happy employees make for a better business. If your people are happy, your business is thriving. But just honing in on your point, those things happen because people who run big organizations decide that they're going to make that change. And you're forcing other people to do that because they're losing talent to the organization who is giving those benefits to their employees. So I suppose it's up to us. Do we want to see this change? Do we want to be that change?
So when you talk about up to us, one of the things I want to bring to the listeners is that when you're looking at entrepreneurs and their dreams, it's also very important to look at the backstory. Like where did this North Star come from? And where does this sense of these beliefs and these truths? So I'd love to, if I can, wind it back in time. And Grace, when I was doing some research and our pre-interviews and such, what I was quite amazed about was that, you're the youngest of 5 kids. I think there's a 10-year separation. So it sounds like You weren't necessarily a planned child, but you came along with extraordinary music talent. So talk to me a little bit about how that unfolded, where you were, I mean, I don't know if protege is too much of an exaggeration, but you're extremely talented and could have very much had a career in the arts.
Well, Tony, I wouldn't say protege, but it certainly was something that I was good at. But the thing is, I was given the opportunity to develop that skill. So you need to learn music. And of course, there's lots of people who are self-taught and they're absolutely incredible musicians. But few of them would say that they wish they never learned to read music. You know, it's a universal language that I deeply believe that everybody should have the opportunity to learn. I knew it was something I was good at. And don't we all feel great when we're good at something? You know, it helps you in so many other areas of your life. So I was privileged to learn music. I'm so delighted that it's something I'm good at. It's still such a huge part of my life. And what you learn from learning music to that standard, so learning classical music, is something that spills over into everything else you do. I use those skills every single day of my life, you know, in particular now helping people to practice their new habits. You don't just suddenly move to a shorter working week and, you know, you've gotten rid of all those habits of working late. You've got to practice them the same way as I had to practice the violin. Every day you've got to go back and say, you know, how did I do today? And I need to practice better habits tomorrow to improve, you know, how I did yesterday or how I did last week.
People like Kevin O'Leary are so outspoken about a waste of time in liberal arts. And I disagree. I think some of the greatest critical thinking comes philosophically in psychology and music. What advice can you give to parents instead of short circuiting and trying to, you know, wire your kids for this world sprint, that sometimes the simplicity of just even learning skills and practice is something you can carry the rest of your life?
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree with that. And I think, you know, we put so much emphasis on subjects like math and absolutely they are really valuable and really important. But I think the more we move towards AI and advances in technology, ideas, creativity become really important for business. And you want your people to have been given the opportunity to explore that. And I think, you know, I believe certainly the way we have educated, I think things are changing, but education, in my opinion, can often squash creativity. You know, those who think outside the box are, you know, your mistakes are a mistake, where if you don't make a mistake, you don't learn, you don't have ideas. You know, not every idea is going to be the right one, but you've got to be given the space to do that. And I think that's the wonderful thing about the arts, about dance, about music, about, you know, you're afforded that opportunity to make mistakes, to learn, to grow, to develop.
The other thing that I sensed when you were talking about the sacrifices that your parents made for you to pursue your dreams, it's also come with some guilt. And do you think that guilt you've turned to your advantage in the sense of, you know, the appreciation that you have for your parents in terms of how you want to give back? Or is that just something you deal with in terms of the circumstances of your childhood, being the youngest and maybe getting a little bit more than the others?
No, I think that's exactly how I would put it, Tony, is that I have used it to my advantage. From a very young age, I was aware that I was lucky to have music lessons, which I think even saying that seems just so unfair and unequal. As you said, I was the youngest of 5 and my parents just weren't in a financial position to put in financially what it takes to go the long distance with music and to have lessons for a very, very long time. And they're really costly. Both my parents also had to work hard to build the life that they did. So I was aware of that. But I was also aware when I joined orchestras that there was a certain caliber of people that were in those orchestras that came from certain areas. And that struck me. And as I said, from a young age, that was something that I was aware of. And I thought, you know, if there is an opportunity for me to do something to change this, it's definitely something I want to be involved in.
Did you ever feel within that orchestra, because I imagine there's people coming in with the brand new instruments and being driven up in the shiny cars. Did you ever feel that there was, even within that circular economy, there was have and have nots and people were treated differently based on their wealth or their privilege?
Yeah. And even, you know, I have been trying to drive different campaigns around access to music education. And sometimes my biggest barrier is that often the people who are in my circle don't necessarily think about the other people who don't have it. It's so far removed from their thinking. They're grand, pull the ladder up, I'm all right, Jack, and they don't look outside. So that actually applies to what we're doing now as well. But people may not think it's affecting their day-to-day life, but when you're looking at changing things like working time, you've got to think of the next generation and your children and what society you're trying to build.
And Joe O'Connor, I teased it a little bit earlier about your thought leadership in this space, and we're going to get into that. But your childhood, I laughed out loud with your sort of sense of humor when you talked about you loved reading and writing, but up until university, you were a bit of a nerd. And when I look at your videos and how confident you are and how gregarious and how controlling in command you are when you're talking to people, the first question I have, because I loved to read and write as a kid as well, what did you read?
When I think about that period in my life, I definitely think about Enid Blyton and the Famous Five, The Secret Seven. These were things that I was acting out in my head and in our garden, Roald Dahl. So I was a big fiction reader.
How about Narnia series? I had you penned for C.S. Lewis and the Narnia Chronicles.
Yeah. Well, definitely that came across the desk at one point too. So yeah, I grew up on fiction. I got away from it for large parts of my life, and I'm pleased to say that I've managed to rediscover that in recent years because there was a transition, I think, when I got to college where the more social side of me clicked into gear, probably too much so, you could argue. But I definitely feel that it's made me a more balanced person. But deep down, I'm still a nerd. You know, if you get to know me outside of the 9 to 5, you know that I'm still a big nerd.
And talk to me about, so your dad was a fishmonger and a bartender. Your mom, because of some illness, really was a stay-at-home. So it wasn't a lot of dollars and cents to spread around, rural Ireland. But you find your way to university because you earned yourself quite a scholarship. That's an accomplishment, but how did you feel when you're in that university, knowing that probably to you, every pound counted, where there might be people in that university that just seemed like to have unlimited spending?
It's funny that I've ended up making a career evangelizing for shorter hours because my dad used to leave the house at 6 o'clock in the morning. My mom was up to, greet him, make him a cup of tea before he went out the door. He often wasn't back till 7 or 8 in the evening. Out on the road. He was working shifts at the weekend. So I certainly didn't grow into work time reduction. I was definitely aware of, I was getting by scraping and scrounging. Most weeks I didn't have £100 and the alcohol budget was very constrained. And I was aware of that compared to most of the other people in my circle. I also was very aware that if I wasn't able to qualify for the student grant, there's no way in hell that I would have been able to go to college. And that definitely gave me an awareness around the importance of equality of opportunity and the, like Grace described, the privilege that I was in that maybe my parents weren't afforded. And
the last question I want to talk to you about in universities, you ran for election twice. The first time you were decimated, and the second time you said you squeaked out a win. What was the best lesson from both of those elections that you took away? My friends had a nickname for me, which was Joe 81. I don't think I've ever shared that before, but that was the number of votes I got in that first election. And just to say that was not a high number. So decimated is the right word to use. But I went into it, being honest, didn't do a huge amount of planning and preparation, was kind of doing it as a dart throw. And it was only during that campaign that I realized, you know what, I like this. I'm good at this. I can do this. I remember the first speech that I gave, a lot of people coming up to me saying, we've already decided that we're supporting somebody else, but that was great. So my takeaway from that wasn't that, I've been, really badly defeated. My takeaway was, what do I need to do to actually do this properly, do this right? And it really struck me the power of having the right people around you, because it would have been I had a great circle of friends that I'm so close to today. And it would have been very easy for them to say, you know what, we've invested a lot of time in a lost cause, in a hopeless case the first time around. But if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have got over the line the second time. So, having that strength of the character, the people around you, I think is an important thing, whether it's student politics, whether it's in business, whether it's in life. Hi, it's Tony Chapman. I just want to take a few seconds to thank you for listening to Chatter That Matters. And if you could do me a favor, subscribe to the show, follow me on Chatter That Matters across any social program, tell your friends about it, because I think the world needs more positivity and possibility, to counter the storm of negativity and growing sense of impossibility. Well, let's get back to the show. Today, I'm joined by Joe O'Connor and Grace Tallon, life partners and partners in work time reduction. And Grace, after your schooling, you became the youngest female to ever be elected to the Council of Dublin. And I sensed it from day one. Your mission in life was to close the gap between the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah, I think you're right. I believe that small things do make a difference. And I think that when we look at the world, it's so easy to think, no point in me being involved, no point in me voting, no point in me supporting different causes. But I think I was lucky to have a family that believed that also, and to be exposed to different campaigns and realize that, your voice matters. And yeah, I've tried to build initiatives and be involved in different projects that do support that and try to close the gap.
And you made another move on the chessboard. Instead of deciding that politics was maybe the lane you're going to spend time in, you got involved for a non-for-profit and once again reached into your love for music and wanting to make sure other people got involved. Tell me what you were doing. And then what I sensed, the pandemic hit and you got hit with an unbelievable sledgehammer.
Well, I made the difficult decision to step away from politics. The area that I was running was changing boundaries. It was becoming a three-seater. The idea that I was going to be where I wanted to be sort of in 10 years was looking at that was going to be, moving more of 20 years. So I decided to take a step away, and I wanted to obviously still do something that was, I believe, powerful and still part of kind of my vision and my mission. I was lucky to get the position as the executive director of a not-for-profit, wonderful organisation in Dublin, primarily sort of focused on education. We have a huge number of students. The pandemic hit, and obviously at that stage, the idea that you would have a music lesson on a Zoom call was alien to people. And it was alien to me at the time. But I had 50 staff, incredible, passionate educators that I knew needed this job. I could not close the doors. We were already struggling, as most not-for-profits are, particularly, arts education. That's always where the first cuts come. So I scrambled. I called somebody that I thought, I think this person might be able to help me. And we were the first music institute up online the following day. So we closed our doors. We were told, that was the day everybody was told, go home, shut your doors. And everybody was on lessons the next day. So that was a Thursday night. And we started the following day. So that was an incredible week for me, actually, because, I learned a huge amount about my own ability and my own confidence. And I think that, as a leader and as CEOs of organizations, you have to trust in that. I think sometimes there's a negativity around confidence, but you've got to be confident in your decisions as a leader, So that was what I kind of learned through that. And it was a very, very difficult time, but a positive one too, I suppose, because we were able to change things.
Grace, I know that you and Joe traveled in similar circles, but from what I understand, it was an initiative that really began this great adventure together.
I knew that small independent businesses in COVID were going to struggle. A lot of these people didn't have an online presence. So I saw Joe had put a post up on I think, Twitter at the time. And I reached out and said, look, I'm looking at trying to do something similar. We both believe in the importance of local business, and we wanted to try and do something to help those businesses survive. So surprisingly, there were hundreds of businesses who just didn't have the knowledge of, at that stage, they didn't have a website, they didn't know how to do that, they didn't know how to sell their products online. So we put a little team together and we set up the Doorstep Market, which was supporting local businesses. The idea is you buy your favorite things from, Doolin was my favorite place to buy things. So you can buy things from, the country in Ireland where you usually go on your holidays, trying to encourage people to support local businesses, which everybody wanted to do, but didn't really have a way to do that at that time. So we set this up, and Tony, the rest is history, I guess.
Okay, so Joe, let me turn it over to you now. This is a lane that you found yourself in, this concept of, work time reduction, shorter work weeks, productivity. When did it become not just something you were curious about, but a lane that you wanted to drive, own the pole position, be someone that's going to be a force of change?
I think with lots of career decisions, I'm not sure that there was one moment, one day where I decided this is what I want to do for, this part of my life. Originally, this was something that was a side hustle, but a voluntary side hustle. I was doing this, talking about this issue back when most people regarded this as a kind of a pie in the sky, crazy idea. There was a very, very small number of businesses in Ireland doing this, and I know that that was the case globally. And I think it was a combination of good foresight and good fortune. Early in the pandemic, I had been talking about this issue. It was more of a philosophical conversation than a practical one back then. And then COVID happened, and there was this huge increase in open-mindedness from employers to different ways of working, to testing out different work models. I was finding, more and more people were contacting me interested in this. So it was partly a pragmatic move to say, I don't on my own have the capacity to support all of these businesses. Let's set something up that creates a little bit of community, that's coordinated, where I can support these businesses in a cohort, in a group. I linked up with University College Dublin and Boston College to track the outcomes of this experiment, which back then in Ireland was very small scale, handful of businesses, and then ended up, having the kind of success where I found myself a little bit on the crest of a wave of something that was, developing into a global conversation. Was one of the few people globally actively doing stuff in this space. And that led me to North America, where 4-Day Week Global, an organization I had been collaborating with for a number of years, were looking to do something similar in the US to what I had done in Ireland. And we moved to New York City in 2021 to try and make that happen.
And so what brought you to Canada? I know that when you were a kid, instead of falling in love with rugby like every other Irish kid, you followed North American sports and hockey, and for some reason the Maple Leafs, given I'm a Habs fan. But I don't want to do a sidebar, but what brought you to Canada? Because to me, I see United States possibly being more open-minded to challenging the status quo than Canadians.
Well, I'd be lying if I said that it was exclusively a professional decision. We had moved to the US initially, and this is to your point of when was that moment that you knew you were doing this as a career? I initially thought that the US was going to be a 12-month project. I had a research assignment with Cornell University. I was going to have a cool experience, and then we're going to move home to Ireland. And obviously, we felt that this had legs. We felt that this had momentum, that there was a real opportunity to grow this in North America. But we didn't feel like settling down. Like, we had a phenomenal experience in NYC. It was an incredible time in our lives, but we didn't feel that was the place that we wanted to settle down and start a family. I had friends in Toronto. I had visited a few times, guys that moved here pretty much straight after we graduated from college. So I knew the city a bit, and I felt like this could be a good balance between, the things we liked about New York, but maybe with a little bit more of a focus on work-life balance, on healthcare, on community, maybe some of the things that we missed a little bit about Ireland. And up to now, I think that decision has been a good one.
You're listening to Chatter That Matters. When we come back, a 4-day work week is a big ask of any company. So I asked Joe and Grace, how do they get leaders to open their minds to this possibility? And then I go out on a limb to share my views on immigration. BK Sethi is one of the many newcomers I've covered who immigrated to Canada and then made the most of their opportunities. But speaking of newcomers, so much depends on their ability to hit the ground running, to navigate the complexities of a new country. Well, that's where the RBC Newcomer Advantage comes in. Here, new can feel like home. And many of the RBC advisors that specialize in this area have been through their own newcomer journey. They can offer you unbiased advice that goes well beyond banking. Introductions to community partners that can help you with housing, careers, children, and even mentorship services. And there's some value-rich offers. You get a no monthly fee banking for a year with an eligible checking account, a credit card, and zero transfer fees when you send money to almost any country in the world, and so much more. I put a link in my podcast notes on how to reach an RBC Newcomer Advisor. It's Tony Chapman, welcoming you to Canada and the RBC Newcomer Advantage.
Shorter work weeks lead to happier, healthier employees.
Yes.
We see that across, a range of different employee well-being indicators, but they also lead to more productive, more efficient companies that find it easier to attract and retain talent. So this is something that can genuinely, if it's positioned right, if it's designed right, if the employer and the employee are working together, this can be a win-win.
You're listening to Chatter That Matters with Tony Chapman, presented by RBC.
Today I'm joined by Joe O'Connor and Grace Tallon. They're life partners, but they're also partners in their new venture, Work Time Reduction. And both come from careers driven by purpose, and both want to lead enterprise to a 4-day work week. Both very attached to the academic world, non-for-profit. How do you turn that into becoming entrepreneurs? Was that an easy step to say, we're going to turn this into a business and grow this business versus, as you said, a research grant, which will be a fantastic experiment. We're going to have a good time, and then we're going to move on to the next.
Well, we felt that there was a demand and a need and an opportunity for this. Let's pull this away from the philosophical conversation around, will we all be working a 4-day work week in 10 years' time? The reality is that this is a growing market. More and more businesses are looking to this as an opportunity to differentiate themselves when it comes to talent and give themselves a competitive advantage. They're looking to this as an opportunity to address issues around productivity, around burnout. I think there's lots of organizations that can't pay top dollar in salaries. Maybe they can't offer complete work from home flexibility. So they're looking for something else that can enable them to retain and recruit the best people. So this is something that all of the data that we see shows that this is something that more and more employers are open to, more and more employers are looking to adopt. So regardless of whether the long-term vision that I hold dearly, that this becomes something that is the norm across society, whether that comes true or not, this is going to continue to be something that I think is going to grow in the years to come, incrementally based on more and more businesses seeing how this can work through the demonstrations we've seen in a whole variety of different industries in different countries, that it can solve real problems and real challenges that they're facing today, and that it can actually allow them to get ahead of the curve when it comes to their competitors. And we are still at this early adapter stage, but I'm convinced that it will be followed by a fast follower stage where there's going to be businesses and industries who have seen their competitors do this, seen the benefits, and then start to turn to this as an opportunity for them and their business.
So Grace, as you're positioning this to clients, I have to believe that most employees would raise their hands going, I would love to have this type of thinking in my organization. We would be a better organization for it and a better culture. Employers who often are reluctant to change the status quo, I have to believe they take quite a bit of convincing. What is your strategy to get organizations to at least open their mind to the possibility that this might be the way to attract, retain, and grow an organization?
That's very much what we talk about. Most of the people that we are supporting, companies we are supporting, are coming to us. So this isn't something that we're selling now. It will probably turn into that, but currently we're not necessarily outwardly selling. People, leaders, CEOs, executive directors on boards, they're already open to this idea. So I personally don't feel that this is really something you can sell to somebody who's totally against it. You have to be somewhat open to the idea before you're going to engage an organization like Work Time Reduction and enter into that. And yes, of course, we deal with lots of employees who want to convince their boss, and we support them and we give them resources and the plan, and we map that out for them. But leaders who are completely against it currently today, we don't see that's the best use of our time and our limited resources. But what I would say to CEOs and leaders who are closed-minded is, how is your business doing? Are your people happy? Your people are your business. If you want your business to thrive, you want your people invested in that business, you want them to stay. This is a gift that is so transformational to their lives that they will be so much happier outside of work, inside of work, and that can only help you grow your business. So it's a no-brainer to me, but that lots of businesses see this as a huge challenge currently.
And Joe, I listened to a lot of your interviews that were up on the YouTube channel. Some of them were podcasts, and you do have a strong point of view. What advice can you give to entrepreneurs to build their personal brand and their thought leadership to lift an entire sector versus just something that might lift their respective business?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's linked to our strategy that Grace has just described, which is this is not something where we're reaching out to 100 people and culture leaders to say, hey, have you thought of the 4-day work week? One of the positives and negatives of what we've seen in the last number of years is this is an issue that has got an awful lot of headlines, coverage, some of it positive, some of it myths and misconceptions that we need to challenge when we engage with people. But it means that I would say most organizations and people leaders have a view on this. Whether it's a well-formed, well-thought-out view or not is another matter, but they have a view. So our focus is very much on growing awareness of us as an organization, growing awareness of the research, the benefits, the opportunity, how if you design this in a very intentional, well-structured, deliberate way, it can really drive value for your business and your people. So a lot of the work that I do in the media is very much around trying to get that message out there so that if and when an organization is looking at work time reduction, is looking at the potential for a shorter work week, that we're one of the organizations that's top of mind when they're starting that process of deliberation.
And Grace, one of your North Stars is really to address the inequality or the unlevel playing field when it involves female workers. And I think you came up with a quote just talking about some boss that said, if she's pregnant, we don't need her because his job is too important. And it really, to me, was the activist coming through. So talk to me about how important that is to you in terms of your personal mission within the company.
Well, the 4-day week obviously isn't a new idea. I mean, women have been doing it for years successfully, but they've been reducing their work time and reducing their pay, but they still have the same job expectations. And, I think every single person listening to this podcast knows at least one woman who has had to do that for different reasons. It's not always just for childcare. Caring responsibilities have changed, and often women are caring for elderly parents and have different other responsibilities, and mostly the caring responsibilities fall to the woman. I think one thing that employers need to think about as well is you are cutting off a whole section of society when you make the workplace so difficult for women to work around their lives outside of that. And that person, those people could be the talent that you needed to turn your business around. So what I see, and I mean, flexibility has to be the first thing. So to me, flexibility is hugely important for family, really important for women. You've got to have that flexibility. And then underneath that, then you have work time reduction to fit into that. That if you afford women the opportunity to fit their work around their life, you have opened up a huge pool of talent. So, I deeply believe that this is going to change the playing field for women and for families. And it remains to be seen over the course of the next, decade. And we're undertaking some research to look at that. But certainly early indicators have shown that men take up so much more of the responsibilities at home. And that has had a huge impact on families. So I'm excited to see where that goes.
And Joe, the elephant in the room is AI. Some people say it's going to stampede and take away almost everybody's job. So it's not going to be about a 4-day work week. It's just going to be chronic unemployment. But you've got a different point of view. You're saying that AI is an important tool in creating confidence with employers that they can actually get more with less hours and have people feel productive and purposeful.
Technological advancements have largely driven the productivity gains that have made reduced work time possible all the way throughout history. And that process kind of started to stall in around the late 70s, early 80s. We've seen incredible advances in the last number of decades that have boosted our productive capacity, things like the intranet, email and digital communications technologies, the globalization of trade. I think if you look at the big picture, a lot of the big fragmentation that we've seen in our economies and our societies, things like what's happening south of the border with the movement to elect Donald Trump and MAGA, Brexit in the UK, far-right populist movements gaining a lot of traction in Europe, it is this sense that people were left behind and the benefits of those gains were not shared with them in an equitable way. I think there's an opportunity to reframe the conversation around AI, where there's a lot of doom and gloom. There's a lot of pessimism. I think there's a lot of fear. I think if you're an employer and you want to be a market leader in adopting and embracing new tools and technologies like large language models and all of the other major developments that have come on stream in the last year, is to look at this and say, is there an opportunity to incentivize people to embrace these tools by sharing some of the benefit of that in the form of reduced work time? So if we can gain 4 hours through use of these tools, can we reinvest 2 hours in new projects and initiatives and give 2 of those hours back to employees in the form of reduced work time? I think that if you offer an incentive that's greater than these tools will create the space for more work, then I think that you've got a much better chance of being a real leader when it comes to these technologies. So look, there's no question. All of the work that I've done in the last 5 years has shown how the companies that have made shorter work weeks possible have used technology to automate certain tasks, to streamline certain administrative processes. Well, the scope and potential for that in the last 12 months alone has grown exponentially. So look at the opportunity.
I think your name sucks. Just having the word reduction in a name, to me, it seems to defeat everything you're talking about, which is about opportunity. It's about growth. It's about a renaissance. I'm wondering why you picked work time reduction as your brand.
I think there was a couple of reasons, and I appreciate you being candid, and I don't disagree. We've had conversations about the negative framing of reduction, and we've tried to counter that with other positive messages alongside it. We wanted to be explicit about what we were talking about. The 4-day work week brings with it a whole lot of baggage in terms of people's misconceptions about what it actually means. And there are a whole variety of different models when we talk about the shorter work week. It could be a 4-day week with a universal day off. It could be a 4-day week with split shifts and rosters. It could be something where you have a differentiated design depending on the team or the department. Maybe it's a 9-day fortnight or a half-day Friday or 5 shorter work days. So we were trying to encapsulate and communicate the fact that this is not one size fits all. And actually, we are being explicit in saying work time, reducing that can bring with it a whole lot of benefits, both for business and for people. That can be a win-win. So our experience with it, and it's not been perfect, but it's been that compared to the 4-day work week, it's maybe less immediate. It's less attention grabbing. It's probably not as sexy and populist, but it's also, once we get in the room with people leaders who are genuinely exploring this, it can tend to be a little bit more inclusive and a little bit less polarizing. But as somebody with your background in communications, any advice that you would have for us would be greatly appreciated and taken on board.
My last questions, and again, because a lot of people listening are on their own journey in life, and so much of this is lessons in life that hopefully they can use to get to where they deserve and want to go. You two have found each other as business partners and life partners. How does that work in terms of who has influence, who has authority? Because there's a lot of couples that are like you, not only dream, they do. So just curious of what advice you could give to other people that find themselves in a similar type of life and business relationship.
I think that we communicate really openly and honestly. And I think we've learned that throughout our lives, throughout different relationships, both professional and business. And, I think that is really important to us. And we always try to communicate daily, pros and cons openly, honestly. And I think that's why it works. We were both anxious going into setting up a business together. It's bloody hard doing it on your own. It's extremely hard doing it with your life partner. So I think the thing that has helped us is communication and being respectful to each other with regard to that. So that's one piece of advice I would give. Don't be afraid and make sure that you're always checking in and communicating. And I think that goes for every partnership.
I probably didn't realize that it was important to me to have somebody who shared my passion for turning ideas into action on my life's journey until I met Grace. And I think that that's really driven everything we've done inside and outside of work. When we first met, we didn't work together. So we've kind of seen both sides of it. It wasn't like we met and we immediately set up a business together. Grace was obviously in a leadership role. So was I. I think one of the big benefits of what we're doing is that we share the successes and we share the stresses. When we get good news, we can celebrate that together. When we get a setback, just in the last few weeks, we had a major project that was due to kick off this month that's been shelved by 6 months. I think we've kind of that inbuilt resilience together, that really makes a difference. So there used to be a time when maybe I was on a high, Grace was on a low, or vice versa, and now we're kind of aligned on that journey, which I think is a pretty cool thing. It definitely, it's not always wonderful, and we have to work at it, but in the round, it's been certainly something I would not dissuade people who are considering it from doing.
I always end my podcast with my 3 takeaways. And the first is just how impressed I am with both of you. And I was from the day we first met. I mean, this was Michelle Smythe saying, can you give these guys 10 minutes? And I think it really comes down to both of you were blessed with upbringing that created this wonderful soul, that you really are there to make a difference. And it's not about, your North Star is not about chasing profit. It's about chasing purpose. And I think one of the most important lessons I always say to entrepreneurs is you need a higher purpose than profit. If you talk to me about an exit strategy, you might as well exit now. But if you talk about changing the world like you do, Grace, that's magic. The second thing is just how many lessons you've learned along the way. I find so often people race through life. They're so consumed by getting to the next point. And when I think about, Joe, how you talked about your love of reading and then the competition university and what you learned about yourself, and Grace, a non-for-profit when, suddenly the pandemic hits and you got to turn everything on Zoom. And the fact that you continue to carry these lessons, as you said, I learned how to practice with music. I can teach my clients to practice. I think is just wonderful. And the third thing that I'm going to say is I'm going to continue to say your name sucks. And it's not a descriptive name. It doesn't do justice for what you're after. You are unleashing something of such extraordinary opportunity for the marketplace. You're giving permission to change the status quo. You're giving people who can't afford talent the ability to attract better talent, to retain their talent. You're giving organizations an opportunity at leaders' organizations to go home at night and go to sleep knowing that they're caring for their employees and they're doing something special. You're allowing, Grace, the women in this world that have knocked themselves down to 4 days, but still do 5 days worth of work with less pay, to say that we can do this a different way. And so I just want you to rethink. I'm not to change your name, but I want you to be bolder and even more passionate about this campaign that you're out to do. Because yes, you'll be successful as a business, but I think that your legacy, and when you look back in your life, is not going to be whether that client delayed you for 6 months or not, or this client came in. It's going to be a lot of different cultures operating in a lot of different ways because of the kind of thinking that you brought to them. So I'm just thrilled to have met you. And if this was Dragon's Den, I'd say I'm investing. So
I'll send over the bank account details later, Tony.
Chatter That Matters is never far from my mind. And I often reflect on the journeys of the guests who have joined me here. And so many have been immigrants or refugees or first-generation Canadians. And their contributions have been instrumental in shaping and enriching our communities, our society, and country. And they're not an anomaly. Immigration has always been vital to Canada, but perhaps never more so than now. Our population is aging, our birth rates are declining, and we urgently need the energy and innovation that immigrants bring to help us build and sustain a new economy. However, where I differ from current policy is in its tendency to be driven solely by numerical quotas. We must move beyond mere numbers and instead adopt a strategy that serves the best interests of our country, the people who are currently here, and those who choose to make Canada their new home. Let's first talk about our country. For it to thrive going forward, we need a vision for a new economy, one that's powered by productivity. It's guided by purpose and abundant with middle-class opportunities. And with our wealth of intellectual, financial, and natural resources, and our proximity to global economic powerhouses like the States, there's no reason why Canada can't become a leader, a superpower in fields like agriculture, technology, content, renewable energy, and so much more. But to achieve this vision, we have to align our private, academic, and public sectors. They have to work more effectively and efficiently. Currently, they seem disjointed rather than working in harmony towards our shared goals. Furthermore, we can't ignore the impact of technological advancements, such as artificial intelligence, on the job market. We need to implement training programs to ensure our citizens can adapt and thrive in this rapidly changing landscape. And equally important is the selection and integration of immigrants who come into Canada. We must ensure that these newcomers are given the opportunities they deserve, rather than being relegated to jobs that don't utilize their skills or talents or ambitions. We all deserve to chase and pursue the Canadian dream. I've witnessed time and time again that when people are given the opportunity to succeed, they not only better their own lives, but also uplift those around them. And if you know anyone who's thinking of coming to Canada, I want to take a moment to give a shout out to RBC and their program, the RBC Newcomer Advantage. Put yourself in the shoes of a newcomer coming into Canada the first time. Culture's different, language could be different, everything's different. And they're facing the daunting task of getting climatized, finding employment, securing housing, and navigating financial systems. The RBC Newcomer Advantage extends beyond banking to help newcomers to hit the ground running. The advisor, more often than not, has already made that journey to Canada, so they understand how people are thinking, feeling, and behaving. And they offer vital resources such as housing assistance, career guidance, and mentorship opportunities, and so much more. Immigration matters to all of us, to you, to me, and to all who are willing to chase the Canadian dream.
Chatter That Matters has been a presentation of RBC.
It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening, and let's chat soon.